So today we're going to talk about the buyer termination of the agreement of sale. It has seemed that more and more buyers these days seem to get cold feet or something triggers them to um, terminate the agreement of sale. So it's happening a lot more common. And one of the things I always see is um, when I get them to review is these notices of termination, how poorly filled out they are. Okay. And it's so important to fill it out correctly because it's what the other side is going to use against you. So if you're terminating for a reason that is not allowable for the buyer to, first off, terminate, and then second off, to get their deposit money back, a very skilled listing agent will call you out on it and potentially hold the deposit hostage. Okay. Not to say that they can't, even if you filled it out correctly, but you have a much better shot when going through mediation or sitting in front of the district justice to state your case. Okay. So let's take a quick look here. This is the notice of termination of agreement of sale and the release. So if you notice on the top right corner, it's the termination, TER, and then there's an A for and release, REL. Okay. So it's a termination and release. So first thing you notice is the property address, seller, buyer. Please fill that out. Okay. Now, just remember, it only takes one party to terminate. Okay. You don't have to have both parties to terminate. You only need one person to terminate. And it's either the buyer or the seller. So in this case, the buyer is terminating in my example here. Okay. The buyer terminates because of paragraph 15 dot capital B dot 1 dot lowercase b dot 2 under notices, assessments, and municipal requirement. Okay, and that is an actual paragraph within the agreement of sale that allows the buyer to terminate. So we'll review what that is then later. But notice how I have cited in there the paragraph, because that's what it asks for. Agreement of sale at paragraph blank. Okay. It doesn't say write out a complete sentence. It just says what paragraph are you doing this. Okay. Now, the most common mistake I see is home inspections, right? That's the number one reason why people back out of a deal, home inspection. So a buyer will back out of the home because of the home inspection, and the buyer agent will elect paragraph 12. Okay. And if I may, I'm going to scroll real quick down here, past everything here. And here it is, paragraph 12, buyer's due diligence inspections. Okay. Now, we all know that if it's filled out and the buyer has 10 days to do it and they terminate on day 9, it's their right to do so. Okay. But citing paragraph 12 is not the correct way. Okay. Because if you read through paragraph 12, it talks just about whether the buyer is electing it or waiving it, who will have the utilities on, and who can inspect the property. It doesn't talk anything about the actual contingency. Okay. It's not until you get down to paragraph 13. Okay. So see how it's so important to cite the right paragraph. Okay. So let's go back to the top here. So after that, you have the terminating party sign. Okay. See how it says terminating party. It doesn't say buyer or seller. Okay. It's the terminating party, which in this case, I have down buyer name because it's the buyer. Okay. And date. Then right below this form is the agreement of the release and distribution of deposit money. Okay. Because just because, hey, the buyer terminated and it's their right to terminate under the inspection contingency doesn't mean that the seller agrees to it, right? They could disagree. They could say, well, he didn't have a professional home inspector done, or he didn't really have a home inspector there. It was just a family member inspecting it. So it could cause a little controversy and the seller may not want to release. So this portion of it, the bottom portion, the release, tells the holding broker, the broker holding the deposit, where to distribute the money. Okay. So in this case, in my example, I just have $15,000, $7,500 to seller, $7,500 to buyer, and buyer and seller signs below, and we distribute the money and we're done. Okay. So that is the termination and release form. Very important. Okay. So I put together by going through the contract, and if I missed anything, please let me know. But I'm pretty sure I have in here all the areas that where within the contract, it states that the buyer can terminate and they get their deposit money back. Okay. So the first one I have is 6, zoning. Okay. Well, let's skip down to zoning here. Okay, 6, zoning. Failure of this agreement to contain the zoning classification, except in cases where the property and each parcel thereof, if subdividable, is zoned solely or primarily to permit single-family dwellings, will render this agreement voidable at buyer's option. And if voided, any deposits tendered by the buyer will be returned to the buyer without any requirement for court action. So if you sell a property and use this agreement of sale, and it so happens it's commercial, okay, and we don't put in there that zoning classification for it, the buyer at their option can void this contract and get their deposit money back. Okay, so that's one spot. Let's go back up here. 8C, buyer financing, the FHA clause. We all know about that, right? How about it, Matt? The FHA VA clause? Good? Yeah, basically stating that the house doesn't appraise, the buyer doesn't have to buy the property and they get their deposit money back. 8F5, lowercase b2, again, under buyer financing, required repairs. Okay, let's pop down to that area. So it's 8F5. F5B2. And this is where if seller will not make the required repairs, or if seller fails to respond within the stated time, buyer will within 5 days notify seller of buyer's choice to, and option 2 is terminate. So that's talking about like FHA repairs, VA repairs, any repairs that are needed for financing. Okay. And it doesn't actually have to be financing too. It could be insurance. Okay. Because paragraph 5 does state if the mortgage lender or a property and casualty insurer providing insurance required by the mortgage lender. Okay. So going back up again, next one, 13B2, inspection contingency, initial response to inspections. And then we also have 13B3, lowercase b2, inspection contingency still, after the negotiation. Okay, after the negotiation period. Let's go to 13B here. So we go down 13B. So within the stated contingency period, and as a result of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C, except as stated in paragraph 13C, 2, if the results of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to seller and terminate this agreement by written notice to seller, with all deposits money returned to buyer. Okay. Then the next one that we had highlighted too is after the negotiation period. So remember, we have 10 days to do the inspection and respond back to the seller with what we want to do. Okay. So if we opt to negotiate, then we have 5 days to negotiate, right? After the 10 days. Correct? Okay. So after those 5 days, then we have the 2 days for the buyer's response. And that's what this is talking about. During that 2-day period, lowercase b, paragraph 2 highlighted here, the buyer can either accept it or they can terminate this agreement by written notice to seller. Okay. So again, it states there that the buyer has the right to terminate.
So you have 10 days to do the inspection, and then is it 5 days to negotiate it, and then 2 days after that to send the.
Correct, Matt. So you have 10 days to do the inspection and respond to the seller with what you want to do. Okay, so you have 3 options then to accept it as is, negotiate, or terminate. Those 3 options, right? So if you opt to negotiate, then we have a 5-day negotiation period after those 10 days are up, okay? And then whatever the seller responds with, then the buyer then has 2 days to accept or terminate. Okay. So that's what you cite under these paragraphs. Okay. I wanted to separate the septic part, okay, because that's paragraph 13C. So it's 13C2 and 13C3. So 13C2 is the inspection contingency. After receiving septic repair proposal or no response from the seller. And 13C3 is inspection contingency where seller will not allow access to repair the septic system. Okay, so let's scroll down there. Sherry, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, this was back on that whole zoning. I hate to interrupt your whole inspection because while I'm thinking about it. So if I would remove everything that is in parentheses, trying to see where this is paragraph 6 maybe?
Let's go to that, okay?
Yeah, paragraph 6.
Yeah.
So if I would read this, failure of this agreement to contain the zoning classification will render this agreement voidable. If you get rid of everything in parentheses. So you're saying that we have to have residential, we have to have something filled in that blank?
Well, except in cases where the property is zoned solely or primarily to permit single-family dwellings. So
Except in case. Okay, so you're buying a single-family home, it's already there, obviously.
Right.
Then it won't apply. Okay.
But if it's a single-family home in a commercial zoning, then you need to include that.
Okay. All right.
And I would even be more specific and actually go into that municipality's zoning and find out what it is, because they always have different names for it, like mixed village use or something like that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Very specific.
Thanks.
Okay. Yep. Okay, so let's go back up here. The 13C2 and 13C3, the septic. Let's take a look at that real quick. So obviously it's kind of important because it's off by itself. I mean, all the other contingencies are lumped under 3 under paragraph 3 there. Under B. And C talks about septics. Okay, so if a report, and I'm reading paragraph C, if a report reveals the need to expand or replace the existing individual on-lot sewage disposal system, seller may within blank days, 25 if not specified, so it's carrying it out quite a ways, right? I mean, 25 is a long time. Within 25 days of receiving the report, submit a proposal to buyer. The proposal will include, but not be limited to, the name of the company to perform the expansion or replacement, provisions for payment, so who's paying for it, including retests and a projected completion date for corrective measures. So the seller hands the buyer the proposal, okay? And within 5 days of receiving that proposal from the seller, or if no proposal is provided within that stated time, okay, buyer will notify seller in writing of buyer's choice to 1, agree to it, 2, terminate, or 3, accept it. Accept the property in the existing system and agree to the release. Okay, so they can agree to the proposal, terminate, or just take the property as is. Accept the property and the existing system. Okay. So there you go. There's another termination. Okay. Now, part 3, though, has a little clause to it. So if the buyer accepts the property as is, okay, we have a bad septic system. The buyer says, don't worry, Mr. Seller, I'll take care of it. Okay. But the bank says, well, you know, we can't give you the money until it's fixed. Okay. So the buyer's like, okay, well, I'll fix it before settlement. What paragraph 3 here is stating is if the seller doesn't allow you access to make that repair, okay, and they send it to you in an email or whatever day they send it, under where I have it highlighted, buyer may within 5 days of seller's denial, okay, for access, terminate this agreement by written notice to seller. Okay. So if the buyer's accepting the property as is, the septic as is, and the lender or the insurer says, well, we can't give you the money or insure it until it's fixed, and the buyer says, well, okay, well, I'll get it fixed before settlement, and the seller says, no, you're not tearing up my yard until after settlement, then the buyer can terminate. Okay, got it? Okay. It's very specific, right? It's a lot of what ifs. So we're done with inspection contingencies. Any questions under that by chance? Okay, so notice I don't have paragraph 12. Okay, that's not where you cite to terminate. It's paragraph 13. Okay. All right, 14. What do we have under 14? Title, surveys, and costs. So there's 2 spots. 14G states seller is unable to give clear title. Okay. And 14G is seller is precluded from conveying title. Precluded, the definition is prevented or made impossible, disallowed or ruled out. Okay. So the seller is not allowed to convey title. Let's go to that paragraph, 14. Okay, title, surveys, and costs. So we have all these paragraphs, and finally we get to paragraph G. If seller is unable to give good and marketable title that is insurable by a reputable title insurance company at the regular rates as specified in paragraph 14E, buyer may terminate this agreement by written notice to seller with all deposits returned to buyer. Okay. And then it even goes on to say, if the title condition precludes seller from conveying title, buyer's sole remedy, so that means the only thing the buyer can do is to terminate this agreement. Upon termination, all deposit monies shall be returned to buyer. Okay. So there's another spot for to cite for buyer termination. Okay. So we
But
want-
that one even goes further though. That the seller will reimburse.
yes. Correct. It actually even says that the seller has to reimburse the buyer for any costs incurred. Inspections, certifications.
Does
Yep.
that include appraisal?
And for those items specified in paragraphs 14C, items 1, 2, 3. So let's go to paragraphs 14C and D. Buyer will pay for the following: title search, title insurance, mechanics lien, flood insurance, fire insurance, hazard insurance, mine substance insurance, or any fee for cancellation, appraisal fees, and charges paid in advance to mortgage lender, and surveys. That's D. Yep, it's right there. It's spelled out for you, Matt.
Seems like that'd be hard to collect.
It may or may not be, right?
Like, what are you gonna do? Put a lien on a property that can't sell?
Right. So there you go. Appraisal is listed. Good question. All right, the next paragraph cited, 15, which is notices, assessments, and municipal requirements. So 15, capital A, 2, lowercase b, states seller not complying with public-private assessment, and 15, capital letter B, 1, lowercase b, 2, seller not complying with municipal requirements. Let's go to 15. Sherry, have you ever had to deal with paragraph 15 ever?
Sorry, I was just
It's
submitting this offer.
Have you ever had
It's
to deal with this?
I'm multitasking. I just submitted it. So paragraph 15 is when you have like municipal requirements such as streetlight, curbs. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, yeah. Sidewalks?
Sidewalks, curbs, like in Lower Paxton Township, they're putting new sewer lines during the middle of the street.
Mhm.
So the homeowners are given a letter and it says that, you know, hey, if we tear up your sidewalk, if we tear up your yard, if we tear up your driveway, we will put it back the way it was at our expense.
Right.
So I would assume if you have a house on the market and you received a letter, you need to provide that to the buyer to sign off so they know what's going on. And I guess if you don't, could the buyer back out if the seller never provided that to them in this paragraph?
Yeah. It sounds like it here. Let's read through it here because it talks about assessments and municipal requirements, notices, assessments, and municipal requirements. So the whole sidewalk and street light thing, that's more municipal, right? But let's talk about, let's see here. The first thing here is in paragraph 15A, in the event any notices of public and or private assessments as described in paragraph 10F are received after seller has signed this agreement and before settlement, so during the pending period, right? Seller will within 5 days of receiving the notice and or assessment provide a copy of the notices and or assessments to buyer and will notify buyer in writing that seller will, 1, fully comply, okay, to which the seller just says, hey, I'm going to comply. Don't worry about it. You're still buying the house, okay? But if the seller doesn't want to comply, then under 15, capital letter A, paragraph 2, lowercase b, where I have it highlighted, terminate this agreement. Okay. Now, what the heck is paragraph 10F talking about, right? It described as described in paragraph 10F. Let's go back up here to 10F real quick. Uh, 10F. Here we go. Public and or private assessments. Seller represents that as of the date seller signed this agreement, no public improvement, condominium, or homeowner association assessments have been made against the property, which remain unpaid, and that no notice by any government or public authority, excluding assessed value, has been served upon seller or anyone on seller's behalf, including notices relating to violations of zoning, housing, building, safety, or fire ordinances that remain uncorrected, and that seller knows of no condition that would constitute a violation of such ordinances that remain uncorrected unless otherwise specified here. Okay. Perfect example of this. We were in the middle of the deal once at a condominium building, a whole building complex, and they assessed every homeowner like $15,000 or something like that they can pay over a span of 20 years. Okay. So if you did the math with interest, it was like an $800 a month assessment. So we had to let the buyer know. And if the seller wasn't willing to pay that at that time, the buyer could back out. Okay. In our case, the seller did opt to pay for it. So that's what this is all alluding back to, that paragraph. Okay. The next one. Capital letter B, if required by law within 30 days from the execution date of this agreement, but in no case later than 15 days prior to settlement date, seller will order at seller's expense a certification from the appropriate municipal department disclosing notice of any uncorrected violations of zoning, housing, building, safety, or fire ordinances, and or a certificate permitting occupancy of the property. If buyer receives a notice of any required repairs, improvements, buyer will promptly deliver a copy of the notice to seller, and within 5 days of receiving notice, the seller will deliver a copy of the notice to buyer and notify buyer in writing of the seller's intention to, one, or A, lowercase a in this case, make the repair. Okay. If they make the repairs, then it's fine, it's muted point. But if they don't want to make the repairs and says to the buyer, hey, I don't want to make the repairs, then within 5 days of that, the buyer can accept it, or two, right there in the highlight, terminate. Terminate this agreement by written notice to seller with all deposit monies returned to buyer. Okay. So years ago, in the city of Harrisburg, they made us do these city inspections. Remember that, Sherry? And that's part of that whole thing there. Okay. If you sell further out east in the Philadelphia area, even resale properties require a CO, certificate of occupancy. And you have to be very careful, because if you don't know it, and you forget to schedule, you could delay settlement, because they don't just come out the next day. It's scheduled maybe like a week or 2 weeks later. Okay. Because they're so busy. But they'll come out and look at it and they'll say, well, you know what, the smoke detectors need to be hardwired or something like that, or you need to add carbon monoxide detectors here and there. So you get that installed, and then you have to schedule them back to come out again, which may take another 10 days from that. So just be aware of what is required by what municipality you're dealing with. Okay, I think for the most part, our area here, we don't have too many of that. The only one that comes to mind right now is maybe Pembroke, but just be careful with that. Okay, just make sure you order everything in a timely manner. Matt.
Isn't there a smoke detector inspection over in like Colonial Park area, isn't there?
No, they actually,
No? They
have a
stop it?
form. They have a form and they just ask you to fill it out.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that and, what is it? The form that states that, your sewer is not dumping into clean water, the water, right? So. All right. So we got paragraph 15 out of the way. Next one is 16. That's condominium and planned community HOA notice. So we have 16 paragraph B and 16 paragraph C number 3. So 16B states initial sale in an HOA condo association seller furnishing public offer statement. Okay, so the initial sale, meaning your buyer is the first owner of the property. Okay, it's new construction. Or a new HOA or condo. Okay. 16C3 is receipt of condo and HOA docs, 5 days. I think we're all pretty much well aware of that rule, but where do you find it? It's right there. Okay, so let's go to 16B and 16C here. All right, condominium planned community, paragraph B. The following applies to initial sales of properties that are part of a condominium or a planned community. So initial sale, okay, first sale. If this is the first sale of the property after creation of a condominium or planned community, seller shall furnish buyer with a public offering statement no later than the date buyer executes this agreement. Buyer may void this agreement within 15 days if condominium, or within 7 days if part of an HOA, after receipt of the public offering statement or any amendment to the statement that materially and adversely affects buyer. Upon buyer declaring this agreement void, all deposit monies will be returned to buyer. Okay. So the public offering statement, that's pretty important, right? We always talk about the resale cert. We never talk about the public offering statement. 16C3. Okay, this is talking about the HOA and condo acts that allow the buyer to get out of a agreement of sale after 5 days after reviewing the document. So the act provides that buyer may declare this agreement void at any time before buyer receives the association document. So they can void it at any time before they get the document. Okay. And for 5 days after receipt, or until settlement, whichever occurs first. Buyer's notice to seller must be in writing. Okay, so just use the termination release form. Upon buyer declaring this agreement void, all deposit monies will return to buyer. Okay. Pretty simple, right? So we got 16 taken care of. All right, the last paragraph that talks about buyer's right to terminate is the maintenance and risk of loss. 18B3B, lowercase b, and that's where the seller does not make, repair, or replace. And 18C, paragraph 2, maintenance and risk of loss if any property is destroyed by fire or some sort of casualty. Okay, let's go to 18. All right, so maintenance and risk of loss. Paragraph number 3 there. If seller does not make, repair, or replace the failed part of the property or agree to credit buyer for its fair market value, or if seller fails to notify buyer of seller's choice, okay, buyer will notify seller in writing within 5 days or before settlement date, whichever is earlier, that buyer will A, accept the property, or B, terminate. Okay, so for example, hot water heater goes out. The seller says, Mr. Buyer, don't worry, I'll fix it before settlement with something similar. You know, if it's a 50-gallon tank, they'll replace it with 50-gallon tank gas. Okay, then it's a moot point. But if the seller says, no, I'm not going to replace it, or they try to negotiate with the buyer, or give a fair credit, you know, if the thing costs $1,200 and they say, well, we'll give you $600 for it, okay, then the buyer has the right to terminate. Okay. Then paragraph 18C, let's just read C real quick. Seller bears the risk of loss from fire and other casualties until settlement. If any property included in this sale is destroyed and not replaced prior to settlement, buyer will, 1, accept the property, or 2, terminate. By written notice, the seller of all deposit monies returned to buyer. So there you go. These are the paragraphs that you should use to cite why the buyer is terminated.
Mhm.
Any questions?
Yes, I have one,
Go
Carm.
ahead, Patty.
Okay, so this happened to me. The buyers terminated and they wanted us to sign the paper saying they would get their deposit money back, but there was no deposit money. But I was told by the broker of the seller's agent that the buyer's agent, that my sellers had to sign it. So I'm not quite sure why. They signed it.
Sure. There's no harm in it, I don't think.
Okay.
That there was no money being held.
Mhm.
I don't think it's, in my opinion, it's probably not necessary, because it does state, let's go. And I should probably say too, it also depends if checkbox G was checkmarked or not too.
I would
Seller
have to
is
go back
limited to
and look at
retaining those
that.
sums paid by buyer, including deposit monies, as liquidated damages. So that's checkmarked, then the seller is limited to retaining the sums paid by buyer. Well, they haven't paid anything, then the seller is limited to retaining 0. Right? But if that box is left unchecked, I've never seen it happen, but if it's not checked, then the seller isn't limited to only the sums paid by the buyer, so they could go maybe after them for damages.
Okay. Well, my sellers signed the paper, but I just didn't understand because we didn't get any deposit money. But
Right.
I guess it's so as not to sue them later for deposit money.
Potentially, yeah. Or
Yes.
it's just, it's neither here or there. Even if the box was checkmark and they asked you to sign it, you know, I know Seth always likes to have that as well. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay.
I guess in
That's
that case, it's
good.
better to be safe than sorry, just to protect everybody.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
but I don't disagree with your thinking on that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, any other questions, sir?
It just always seems weird that paragraph 16C3, that you can void the contract before you get
The documents,
the documents, like,
right?
that's like the biggest out in the whole contract, isn't it?
Yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, the act provides a buyer may declare this agreement void at any time before buyer receives the association documents and for 5 days after receipt. Yep. let's go back up to
This
one.
one seems like a weird one.
Selling expense will request for the association, its certificate of resale and any other documents. So it's not just a resale cert, it's everything. It's the declarations, it's the insurance, master insurance policy. Any documents associated with that HOA or condo.
Yeah, you know how slow those can be to collect from different places too, you know?
Well, it's actually a lot faster now if you want it to be with some of these places that have it online, Matt. But my gosh, they charge an arm and a leg. It's like $350 to get them now, at least. $350, and you can actually pay them to expedite it. And if you want to expedite it, I think some of them charge anywhere from $75 to $125, and you can get it like the next day. The funny thing was the one time I was like, well, I don't need it expedited because if I get it in a week, that's fine. They still have a home inspection contingency if they really wanted to back out. So I opted to not expedite it, and guess what? The next day I got it. I didn't have to pay the fee, and they still expedited it for me. So, but that's it.